Welcome everyone, this is Wayoff, and this is the patch 9.0 test server, which I've just spent the last 4 hours getting on and then playing around with for a little bit. Now, one of the big pieces of news for 9.0 is the beginnings of integration with the Havoc's physics engine. And the main features they put in regards to that is now things like the wheels on the vehicles move independently of each other, interacting with the terrain they're going over. And if you blow up someone's tank with an ammo rack hit, the turret flies off and you can use the turret as cover. That's pretty freaking awesome, having seen it twice now. The other big news is graphics. They are beginning to add the HD models in. This right here is the HD Tiger, or at least as HD as it's going to get on my computer. Now, some people think that all the tanks got their HD skin simultaneously, but that is not actually the case. What has been applied to the other tanks is a new set of shaders. So they do look better, but they don't have the full HD treatment. Now, I saw early recordings on 9.0 coming out that essentially graphics and physics didn't affect anyone's runtime, as it were. Everything kind of played at the same performance. That's true with the physics engine, I'd have to say, and that's partly because for most of us we have multi-core CPUs, and whatever calculations Havoc has to make, it does on a separate core. So, or at least that is what the rumor mill says. I have not personally worked with the Havoc engine, therefore I don't know definitively, but that is what has been said at least. On the new shaders and models, it actually has affected performance. I mean, I can still play this game in maximum when I'm not trying to record video, but my frame rate gets tanked to hell. And I know Fraps sucks. Let's all be clear, Fraps sucks on this sort of thing. But it's what I have to work with. And even without trying to record, there has been a frame rate loss, at least on my end. But I don't have an i7, I only have an i5, and stuff like that. So I think the latest and greatest, the cream of the crop PCs are not going to have an issue with this. And you can also see this shiny new tank garage here. It reminds me vaguely of some of the tank museums I've seen on YouTube, since I haven't been allowed to go to them myself, like Kubinka. And if I slaughtered that name, my apologies. I do not know whether this is the new premium garage, or if this is going to be the garage available to everyone, or maybe it's just something that sits on the test server. I don't know. We'll see. 4 tanks got their new HD models. I have 2 of them currently. It's the Tiger and the the T54, I believe. Here we are. Now, I have to say, I really do like the T54 model as the HD render. It looks very nice. I like some little details they've picked out on the track guards and stuff like that. And I think you can kind of tell the difference if we go between this one and the T62. The difference between the full HD model and just the shader. You can see where the shaders definitely improved the model with the T62. But there's more points of articulation, I think. More, it's silly to say because it's like a 3D medium, but parts of it pop out more to you than they do on the older model. It feels more alive, I guess. We'll go with that. I'm trying to struggle with words here. Good stuff. And for the purposes of the recording, I have turned shadows down. I could just turn them off, but everything starts looking really janky when I do that. So, overall, physics is starting to come in. That's interesting. And it's vaguely game-changing in a way. I mean, if you manage to ammo rack someone, you could putz around with their turret in front of you, and you could make yourself hold down, I suppose. And it's kind of cool to watch these wheels down here roll over different objects independently. Very neat. Not really, that part's not really game-changing. Destructible buildings, I haven't tested this enough, but I don't think they're in yet. I think we're still dealing with the same models and stuff. So, the other big news would be historical battles. This new game mode that World of Tanks has, to my knowledge, played around, toyed with the idea for many a year, and nothing ever really came of it. And here, 9.0, we're finally seeing something out of it. And essentially what you get is 3 historical maps, historical battles, with force compositions that are limited by the time in which the conflict occurred. Now you'll know, if anyone's played World of Tanks for a long period of time, will know that most of the tanks have both their real-world armaments and theoretical armaments. Like the big one on my mind right now is the Tiger. Its top-tier gun is the KWK-43L71, which, like, say we go to the Battle of Prokhorovka, again, I apologize if I'm slaughtering names, you don't get that. That wasn't on that tank. They thought about putting it on there, to my knowledge. But instead, you get the KWK-36. This short little number here. And that's not really... there are more extreme examples, like the ISU-152 does not get the BL-10. It gets that 152mm howitzer that fires derpy heat shells anyway. So, back to the historical. That out of the way. Right now, we currently have 3 battles. 2 take place on the Erlenberg map. The language hasn't been translated, but I do know this third one here is supposed to be the Battle of the Bulge. I'm not too sure about this one on the same map. My history on this area is not that great. So essentially, you see a loadout down below of what you can pick for this fight. And what it will do is it'll take the tank, as long as you've bought it and you have crew, it will take the tank and, for the period of the battle, fit the modules that Wargaming has decided that it should be fitted with for this historical period of time. On top of that, you see down here a cost of required ammunition for SU-152, and you can look over here on the info button, and what they've done, instead of allowing you to choose your ammo loadouts, they give you a prepackaged set that is supposedly representative of the ammo that would have been used at the time, or the quantities of it that would have been used at the time. Now, you'll also notice that there is a serious tier difference, by and large. The highest, like, say on Prokhorovka here, you get the SU-152 is your highest tier Russian tank. Tank destroyer, as it would be. An assault gun, tier 7. On the German side, you can have tier 8 up to a Ferdinand. Of course, it will not be the Ferdinand with the 124. That was not a thing. So you get Tigers and Panthers and Ferdinands. Oh my, what are the Russians going to do? Well, for starters, that's fairly... The tanks they are allowing each side to have, to my knowledge, are accurate to what actually happened in history. However, not only is that the case, but the numerical difference is also in place most of the time. So what you'll usually see with the matchmaker is you'll see a clump of higher strength, higher tier Germans versus a larger number of smaller tier Russians. And I will show you battle footage after this little talk here, but so far matchmakers done that pretty well in terms of the numerical difference. I've seen a few cases where it's just ridiculous and the other side is doomed to lose from the outset. And we will talk more about that. And right now it is just Germans, Americans, and Russians. I don't think we'll see much of the Japanese or the Chinese for very good reasons. I mean, I guess you did have a Japanese-Chinese conflict in World War II, but most of the tanks on either one of those trees wouldn't be there, and the amount of armor present in those conflicts wasn't that great either. And as far as the campaign in the Pacific overall, there wasn't a lot of huge tank conflict. The battlefields that were part of the Pacific Theater didn't really play into that. So I don't think we'll see much of the Japanese or the Chinese. And even the French, I don't see where they're going to fit in very well. Because the thing that hasn't changed with historical is that the meta that was already in place in the regular game stays there. And take, for example, French tanks who have, at low tiers, are just kind of garbage. I mean, they can take hits, but even that's been balanced out so they can be destroyed by plenty of stuff. And they can't hurt a fly. And the only time the French really had an involvement with their tanks in World War II was right at the beginning. So I don't see how that's going to work out for them. I think, for the moment, we'll definitely see Russian, German, American. There's plenty of that to go around. If they had an Italian tree, we could argue that there could be something like that going on, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. The Italians didn't really have a lot of tanks. But I don't know. I think apart from adding more battles, we may be seeing the full breadth of what historical will encompass in terms of units used. Although I have to say, I would like to see a map that had the Pershing. I kind of want to see the Pershing in historical context now, or more historical context. Yeah, that's about it here, and we will go to some historical battles footage. Here we have our first historical game that I actually recorded, probably the fourth one I played overall. This is the Battle of the Bulge. I am on the German side. This is the Erlenberg map. And it is Germans versus the US. And as you can see, what I said earlier about the numerical advantage that the Allied teams in particular are not necessarily guaranteed, but are likely to have. It's very present here with a 4 to 9 tank setup. However, we do have a Tiger 2, a Tiger 1, a Panther, and then me in a tiny little Panzer IV-H, because I didn't feel like playing a heavy tank this time. Now, one thing to note, which is kind of funny right now on the test server, is that the line for playing German tanks is out the fricking window, and the line for playing Russians or Americans is much, much shorter. And in fact, most of the time, games are waiting to start because they haven't found enough American players yet. Probably because the Germans get all the giant tanks there when things are going to really rock the show. And this is the first time I've played this historical battle. Like, again, only the 5th time I played it, but this is the first time I played it with a small medium tank on the German side. And I don't really know what to do with myself. I don't have the armor to stand up to a mass of Hellcats and Sherman Jumbos, because the Jumbo is almost what everyone will pick after the Hellcat in this current iteration of the test server. So we kind of just derp around, and we want to take defensive positions of some variety. Now I gotta point out the new sniper mode lens tinting, that is kind of cool. I do appreciate that little touch that they did. Trying to get shots on a Hellcat that's zooming around with no real luck. Now, a big thing about being on the German team when you're this outnumbered is that chances are you're not usually going to see your enemy before they see you. You're such a small unit, you can't risk anyone. And that ends up hurting me rather severely. Shot to hell. Let's try that again, shall we? This is again Erlenberg. Battle of the Bulge. I am again a Panzer IV. Team composition hasn't exactly changed that much either. And there was a reason why I showed you that previous clip, which I will get to later. This is an example of a slightly wiser me now, heading out with a better plan in mind. By now, it's been established, it didn't really take long, that Germans have to fight defensively on this map by and large. They're usually outnumbered severely. And the Panther on our team will make the call to fight up next to that house a couple 100 meters ahead of me. And here I am, thinking I'm covering something when I'm really not. If I was wanting to cover their advance, I would be pointing the other direction, but whatever. I suppose I'm also a little gun-shy after getting completely stomped out in the last game by a horde of little Shermans that I never even saw. So they're moving up to that house. They're going to have a decent vantage point. I'm deciding to sit here low to try and get the early spot on people that are coming across our flag here. Because you can still flag cap in this game, to my knowledge. I mean, the points still count down. It's never happened, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone's done it on historical. So I'm going to sit here, try and stay relatively low, and get spots on people. Because as long as there's open-top tank destroyers, unless I'm very mistaken, the Americans in particular have a spotting distance advantage on any German tank they're going to come across in Battle of the Bulge. And that's kind of a huge issue, because they can, usually with their numerical superiority, they can spare someone to sacrifice as a scout, where the Germans really can't. Because similar to team battles, it seems, I have not confirmed this, but it seems that similar to team battles, if you have, it's kind of like a point system where the larger tanks you have, the fewer tanks overall you're going to have. There's me getting the spots on people that are in our cap, which will give our Panther and Tigers something to shoot at, hopefully. And me missing horrifically. It wasn't just me for once. There actually was some interesting server latency spikes that were going on at the time. Sometimes even my consumables in regular games wouldn't work properly. So we lose our Jagdpanther early. I have yet to see a Jagdpanther in historical survive longer than 10 seconds. It usually just gets bumped off by a PCR or something else. People will expend their ammunition stores for it. And its armor's not really that good. Gonna trade some fire here with a jumbo that's deciding to sit with its flank to me. And I mean, the initial exchange looks good. We've gotten 3 tanks, so we've only lost 1. It should have gone really well. However, at this point, it may be noted that nothing seems to be going on with our Tiger 2. And I don't really know what happened to him. He did actually seemingly went AFK. It was probably a server problem or something like that, but he goes pretty much quiet, and it's down to the Panther to do all the killing, and he's gonna rush. And this is spoiler warning, we lose this game, and I think this is partly why, is that we ended up splitting our forces right about here. Tiger 2's a lame duck at this point. He's not doing anything. And the Panther bull rushes that Sherman, takes him down. I don't have the accuracy really to deal with this Hellcat that's sneaking across. It doesn't help he's in cover consistently. And there's the spotting thing that's biting me in the ass again, is I can't get the clear spot on him, even though he's in open ground, moving at high speed. I can't apparently see him over an open field. And I have to admit, in this mode, the render distance and spotting distance mechanics are an arch nemesis, especially of the German team. Because it allows things like Hellcats with their camo ratings to sit right in front of you, almost in open cover. And you can't see them, but they can see you. You see the Tiger 2 is definitely gone at this point. I get a nice shot on that guy, light him on fire, miss the follow-up. And our Tiger 2's dead, because with all that armor, if they're that close, they're going to penetrate him all over the place. Tiger 2 lower Glacius versus Hellcat guns, or especially Tiger 2 back, no. It doesn't matter, the Hellcats are stuck with their more stock weaponry. They don't get their big N-tier gun, but it doesn't matter in this case. So the Tiger 2's dead, and I'm all alone. The Panther is over there somewhere looking for a tank that is no longer there. Because the Hellcat that was there has wisely fled. And this leaves me facing soon-to-be 3 tank destroyers, including a Slugger, which shoots me right in the face. Me versus 3 mobile tank destroyers, it's never a fight the Panzer IV is going to win on any Earth, or any universe for that matter. For all the shiny armor that it looks like it has, it doesn't do it much good. It's still so thin that none of these tanks have to struggle at all to penetrate you. And you see I just got driven by a Hellcat. Joy. And our Panther is going to go down right here as well. Again, like, the Panther's armor is okay, but not even its upper Glacius can stop anything that's coming from these Hellcats and Sluggers. And they're not even firing APCR for the most part. They're just firing regular AP. And maybe they're getting some freakishly high rolls, but I mean, he just gets picked apart. It's not very pretty. And this essentially serves as a golden reminder of something that the German teams are rapidly learning. Is like, never split up, never divide your fire, never do anything of the sort. Stick together, clump up, turtle like hell half the time, and focus fire. He's going to get a few more shots. And honestly, either he's rolling low or the gun's damage is just, you know, pathetic. He's getting zapped really hard by these Hellcats. And he's down. Another loss to Germany. Now, it's not to say that the Germans lose every fight on Erlenberg. I've seen them win fights on Erlenberg. I've even won a few fights on Erlenberg. It just so happens that my recording didn't seem to want to work when I was actually winning. It was very sad and unfortunate circumstances those are. However, the games I have played for Historical Battle so far have highlighted some issues that concern me, I suppose, moving forward. And I'm not going to write off this mode entirely and go, oh, it's a giant piece of crap and we should never play it. Because this is the test server. It's a test build, supposedly. So they can, and might, make changes to it. But I think at the root of my concern is the fact that, from what I've observed, inherently, World of Tanks is not a game that's balanced for asymmetrical conflict. It is balanced for teams of 15 tanks in particular tier brackets. These days, it's balanced for a 2 and at the extreme 3-tier spread. And we've already seen how that screws over tanks that are way below or way out of that tier. Take the plight of certain scout tanks, for instance, that have no business being in Tier 8 or even Tier 10 games and yet are flung there consistently. At the end of the day, this game is balanced for those 15 on 15 conflicts. And this historical mode does not play like those for a variety of reasons. The biggest one is usually the numbers. And the Axis, in this case only represented by Germany, is supposed to be outnumbered pretty much all the time with all these battles, because these were all fights from when Germany was either being stalled or on the back foot, and they were never a numerically superior force, in my understanding. Highly technological, highly mechanized army that it was. It never had the hundreds of thousands of men and tanks and resources to fling at people. And indeed, if the books have it right, that's a big part of why the Allies eventually won, was through numerical superiority. And these tanks aren't balanced for that conflict. Now you see a game here that I'm playing in the Hellcat, again Battle of the Bulge, and the Germans, again only like 3 of them, are pretty much just being swarmed by us because they didn't take up a nice defensible position. It's almost sad, really, to watch these supposedly very dangerous tanks just getting picked apart. But that's not really the point. I'll start with the 2 big issues for me right now. The spotting and the render range mechanics. I'm not a huge fan of them in the regular game. I'm not even going to pretend. I understand that the game is balanced around them and they work. But in historical, it gets very frustrating. I'm not even going to say broken. It's too early to call it broken. But it's incredibly frustrating. I had a game in a match of all Tigers, and we actually won this. But literally, Hellcats were 120 meters ahead of us in open ground, and we couldn't see them. They were invisible until they shot us. And eventually we mowed them down because we were a pile of tigers, and much like honey badgers, tiger don't care. Assuming there's enough tigers to not care. That's very frustrating. And honestly, where it's even a bigger problem right now is Prokhorovka. Right now, even though the Russians usually have a numerical superiority on that map, much like the Americans do, if they fight it like a standard Prokhorovka game, they will die. If you do, especially what North American meta seems to dictate right now for this map, if you do that, and you're Russian, the Germans will pick you apart. You don't have too many open-covered, or open-top tanks, you don't have the view range in your advantage nearly as much. And if you do this spread out in camp business, they're going to be able to pick you off one by one. And that's not very fun at all. Another issue that comes to mind is HP for these tanks. I don't see how that works as well in historical battles as it does in regular battles. Because HP is an arbitrary number that was assigned by Wargaming, again, for the balance of a 15 on 15 fight. In historical battles, you have a situation where a Hellcat can tank long enough, can tank a Tiger II. It can take about 3 hits from them if the Tiger II hits with all of those shells. Considering the fact that there's about, 9 of these little guys running around in the field, that's not a good news situation for a Tiger II. 3 Tiger IIs versus 9 or sometimes 12 Hellcats? The Hellcats can just run you down. They can just surround you. And even if you get the hits off, you'll never do enough damage. Your DPM is not high enough to stop them from just tanking you out and damage sponging you until you die. Because once they get around the Tiger II, it's over. You're dead. And the response to that thus far or all of this thus far, has been to camp like crazy, especially for the German teams. Cluster up in a corner, hide. Because if you go out on the offensive, you'll just get, picked to pieces. And that honestly makes the mode very boring right now. I have seen some incredibly boring games. I cannot say that I've had a really fun one thus far. I mean, the second Panzer IV game I showed you, that was kind of interesting. I was able to use the spotting mechanic to my advantage and give my team spots, but that's just another day in the park. It's not that interesting or thrilling. Mostly I just feel utter frustration most of the time. And Prokhorovka right now is just a nightmare. I mean, time and again, you get Russian teams in particular that, the whole impetus is to play Prokhorovka like you always play Prokhorovka, and it doesn't work because you die a lot. The only time I've won Prokhorovka as Russians is when we did what would have been complete suicide in a standard game and rushed. A really nice, tight rushing formation. And we were able to get across the field and single out each German target, hammer them down with superior numbers, and then go on to the next one. So what it looks like right now is essentially Allies Swarm and Axis Turtle. And that's super, super boring. It's super predictable. The other problem is that World of Tanks is something that, with the amount of arbitrary stats and rules it has, can be metagamed like no other. There are tanks that you're going to pick based on these rules, based on the meta, not because, they're cool or anything, but because they're simply the most efficient. And Historical Battles is no different. Again, the point system speculation is just that on my part, a speculation. What I have seen is the fact that if there are Tiger 2s in the queue, you will have less overall of a team, which is very much like the team battles to my understanding, or the company battles where you have a set amount of points and you use those points on particular tanks, and that can lead you to having more or less than your opponent. I mean, to do a slight bit of theory crafting right now, I think the best German tank for Erlenberg in particular would be the Tiger 1 in this case. Because in the current setup of the game, the Tiger 1 seems to have been relegated to this DPM damage sponge, a box with a gun with tons of health. And they're perfect for soaking up incoming fire and tossing it right back. And since they're not as big as the Tiger 2, you can get more of them. Most of the times when I see multiple Tiger 1s in queues, they get grouped together in groups of like 4 or 5, versus, 9 or 12 Americans. And that goes a lot better for the Germans, because now they have a larger number of tanks with decent DPM and a lot of health. They can afford to play a maneuvering game. And that's terrifying for the American forces thus far, because now they can't rely on having the advantage of getting able to pick their engagements consistently unless they're very well organized. The Tigers, if they move together, will be able to dictate the flow of battle much better than, say, a 3-man team, which is almost always on the defensive. I mean, the Panther really just doesn't deliver. It's still as lackluster a tank as it ever was in a regular Tier 7 game. It can be picked apart by most things on the opposing team in the current historical battles, and its gun doesn't have the DPM to make up for that fact. It's not fast enough to give it a huge advantage over just using the Tiger, which has a better gun, more health, and more armor on average. For Prokhorovka, what I've seen a lot of is people stacking Su-152s. I can only imagine it's because of the howitzer and the heat shell. Unfortunately, this strategy can go wrong in a hurry because the accuracy of that howitzer is not great over long ranges. And this goes back to the whole deal with playing Prokhorovka like you would a regular arcade game, which doesn't work out in your favor. Because, sure, you can luck out and slam someone with that heat and totally wreck their day, and your team could win. But you're more likely to miss, and then when you run out of heat shells, you're already going to be in trouble. This is a sort of game mode that, in a way, would benefit from using platoons. But it would also not benefit from using platoons because platoons are more likely to pick on those particular aspects. They'll give them a very large advantage, and it gives them a really good chance at just pub stomping everyone to death, more so than in an arcade game of 15 on 15. The final problem is that in a mode like this, player participation is extremely important. And if you have a player that's a bot or is AFK, especially on the Axis side, you're done. You better hope that that person showed up in a Panzer II, because if they're in one of your main tanks and they go AFK or they're a bot, that's a huge amount of your force just blown right away. I know this sounds very negative, but I will stress the fact that these are theories and impressions on what I've seen so far. It might develop differently, and it might come out okay, but I foresee mechanical troubles just from the get-go of how this game has been balanced up to this point for an entirely different format that by no means is asymmetrical. I really hope it turns out better, but I get a feeling for it to really reach its full potential that really these tanks and their items would have to be balanced individually for this mode to take into account the particular nature of how engagements work here. And on that rather depressing note, that draws these first impressions of mine to a close. It probably sounds more negative than I really think it is. There are a lot of high points. I like the fact that the Havoc physics engine is getting along and the HD skins are coming along really nicely. And all in all, I think historical battles have potential, but I think at this stage there's a lot of things that need to be worked out. But this is only the first version of the test server. There should be another one coming up in a few weeks, I believe. And I will definitely be back to see how things have progressed. Now for the next week, I will pretty much not be doing much of anything since I have a big contract job I have to go do until Friday. If I do not get it up before Tuesday, then on Saturday we will have the War Thunder review of the Typhoon Mark 1A. Which is part of a 2-part series on the Typhoons that I will try to be doing and have done by the end of the first week of April. We'll see how that goes. Until next time, good luck out there.